Hello, welcome to today's webinar on working with consultants. This webinar is one of a series hosted by the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management. I'm Patricia Bush, Program Manager for Bridges and Design at AASHTO, and today's host. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes to help you enjoy today's session. All attendees are automatically muted for the entire webinar. If you have questions at any point during the presentations, you may submit them by using the Q&A button on your Zoom webinar control panel. We will answer them as time allows. This session is being recorded, and the link will be made available on the Technical Committee on Project Management webpage. You can easily navigate to it by going to design.transportation.org and selecting Project Management from the menu on the left. An email with a PDH certificate will be sent to all attendees later today. If you can't find it, be sure to check your spam or junk folders. Download the certificate and keep it for your records. Now I would like to introduce Chris Werner with Rawlins Infra Consult. Chris began his career working as a consultant for municipalities and various departments of transportation, performing technical responsibilities associated with roadway design, traffic engineering, and hydraulic analysis. Chris then transitioned to project management, working with multidisciplinary teams to perform environmental and engineering analysis for environmental documentation to fulfill NEPA requirements and obtaining permits for project construction. Chris later served as the Director of Technical Services at the North Carolina Department of Transportation, where he initiated department-wide pre-construction efforts to improve program delivery, establish a streamlined, transparent, repeatable, and accountable project delivery process, integrate pre-construction and construction technical discipline, and establish the project manager role while implementing a matrix organization for pre-construction teams. Chris currently works at Rawlins Infra Consult as an infrastructure advisor, supporting departments of transportation with organizational change and improving project and program delivery. Hey, Chris.
Thank you, Trish. We're excited to have you all here, and I'm glad that you remain highly interested in what the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management is doing. We invite you to continue to stay tuned with what we've got going on. We're bringing a lot of really good topics to project managers all across the state. But today we have three very experienced panelists with offering very different perspectives and different backgrounds. And so I'd like to begin by introducing them. First off is Jeff Clanton. Jeff is a registered professional engineer with 39 years of experience at NDOT. He has been involved in collaborating with consultants in project delivery for 30 of those years, with roles including Design Division Consultant Services Supervisor, Contract Administration Division Consultant Contracting Manager, and is currently Director of the Major Projects Delivery. More than 90% of NDOT's program involves consultant product development, with an annual budget exceeding over $300 million per year. Jeff was a member of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Design Preliminary Construction Engineering Management Technical Committee for 10 years, and has been a member of the Technical Committee on Project Management since its inception in 2016. Next, we have Peter Haley, who is the State Pavement Engineer for the Rhode Island Department of Transportation. Mr. Haley is a registered professional engineer who holds an MS degree in civil and environmental engineering. He has been employed in various capacities at the Rhode Island DOT since 1990, and he currently manages Rhode Island DOT's Pavement Engineering and Asset Management Office. In his current role, Mr. Healy is responsible for development of Rhode Island DOT's pavement capital, preservation, and immediate actions program, execution of the pavement infrastructure components of Rhode Island DOT's asset management plan, and reporting National Highway System pavement performance to FHWA. Prior to his current assignment, Peter managed the highway engineering and environmental permitting offices, and prior to that was a project manager for many years. Mr. Haley has been a member of numerous AASHTO committees over the years, and he currently sits on the AASHTO Technical Committee on Project Management and the AASHTO Special Committee on Research and Innovation. And finally, we have Paul Houston. Paul has more than 30 years of experience in the transportation industry He began his career as a project manager at the Minnesota Department of Transportation with a focus on urban and rural highway improvement projects in the northeastern part of the state around Duluth. And he later became MDOT's Central Office Design Build Program Director to develop and implement a new statewide approach to design build delivery. Since joining HNTB nearly 20 years ago, Paul has been a program and construction manager working with state and local transportation agencies around the country to plan and deliver alternative delivery projects. In addition to his AASHTO Technical Committee project management role, Paul is an active member on several committees on the Design Build Institute of America and TRB's Standing Committee on Project Delivery Methods. So welcome everyone. At this time, we'd like to do a quick survey to see who we have in attendance for today's webinar and also what our geographic spread looks like. So if you'll take a second and fill out the poll, it will help us see what kind of spread we have. While we're doing that, with today's webinar, we really want to kind of pull the curtain back and share some perspectives. And in my opinion, perspective is really a valuable thing that you can't place a dollar on. And oftentimes understanding or obtaining perspective is hard unless you've lived them or you make an intentional effort to seek out different perspectives. And that's what we're doing today. We're being intentional. We want to share some insights and perspectives from our panel, specifically on what motivates DOTs to utilize consultants, what motivates consultants to want to work with DOTs, how consultants really work, and discuss some best practices to ensure successful outcomes when DOTs and consultant partners partner with one another. And how about it, Trish? What do we see from the poll? Okay, so we got pretty good representation here. Looks like the Southeast and the Midwest are around 30%. We have quite a few DOT folks as well as some consultants. We'll have to work to try to get more consultants to participate in these to truly get the most value out of the webinar. All right, thanks, Trish. As a reminder to you all, we will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. So please remember to go ahead and put your questions in the chat box along the way so we can have some good discussion at the end. And also, if you have ideas for future webinar topics that the TCPM should consider, please feel free to post those in the chat box as well. At the end of the webinar, we hope you all have an increase in understanding and perspective while realizing today's discussion is the perspective of our panelists and may not necessarily represent all DOTs or all consultants' perspectives. All right, so let's get started. We'd like to hear from our DOT panelists, their perspectives on what motivates them to use a consultant. Jeff, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure. So what are agency motivations for using consultants? With the growth of our highway program and the limited growth of staff, it's a foregone conclusion at NDOT that we're consulting out a lot of project development work. And this is more and more common among state DOTs. Some DOTs have FTE caps. We have retirements, staff turnover, DOT hiring processes that can be slow and lacking in flexibility compared to the private sector, and compensation competitiveness can be an issue. Project development and construction processes, as you all know, are very labor intensive. Considering all of the activities required, including planning, alternative analysis, design, permitting and approval, NEPA utility coordination, advertising and procurement, construction administration, and construction and support, such as shop drawing review. There's a lot of resource needed for our transportation project delivery.
Another very significant issue is just the ability to maintain some flexibility. Jeff talked about staffing challenges, and obviously as a DOT, we're in a period of stability right now with IIJA, but certainly Over the years, there have been periods of financial instability, which of course led to the need to staff up and in some cases staff down. And that can be very challenging given the inflexibility of the public systems. The use of consultants really provides a lot of flexibility in that regard. And it also allows DOTs to transfer some risk, specifically on the staffing and also with respect to design. When you think about, errors and emissions and things of that nature. The other big thing is expertise. You have subject matter experts within the consulting community that sometimes you don't have within the DOTs. They can bring experience to bear. They're problem solvers. They may have some innovative methods that DOTs have not been exposed to in the past. And often, most importantly, experience with similar types of projects. So a lot of times you really have a good opportunity to use the consultants to the DOT's benefit to address those types of problems that you may not have encountered before, and frankly, expose the DOT staff to some of the expertise within that consultant community. Oftentimes, we also have unique designs. Specifically, you may have, for example, vertical construction. We tend to be horizontal in our line of work. So vertical construction can be a big issue, be it it could be a transfer station or a welcome center, something like that. Consultants can help with a lot of the design challenges you may encounter, subsurface utility work, mobility, maintaining mobility during construction being big among them. Construction contracting expertise. Paul mentioned that. Design, bid, build is in widespread use now. Incentives, disincentives, alternative technical concepts, things of that nature. And then, of course, construction methodology expertise, prefabrication, modular construction, and things of that nature. These are all things that consultants can bring a lot to bear with respect to assisting the DOTs.
Consultants can also bring specialized software, hardware, and equipment that DOTs may not have. System management software, digital twin 3D software, specialized equipment for subsurface exploration, sampling, and testing that DOTs may not have available. And there can be real time and cost savings with the use of consultants in delivering projects sooner.
So to summarize the DOT's perspectives, really you can kind of boil it down to a few main points, specifically bench depth, right? The consulting community can bring bench depth to the table. Some flexibility with respect to contracting, specific contract methods, or staffing up, staffing down, that type of thing. Subject matter expertise, which we discussed in some detail. The additional resources that Jeff just talked about. I mentioned earlier the risk transfer component. And all of this really kind of comes to an apex and ultimately leads to time and cost savings and obviously expertise transferred to the DOT staff.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Peter. Appreciate that perspective. We're going to transition now to try to get a better understanding of what motivates consultants to work with DOTs. What I've observed and listened to Peter and Jeff is we're probably not that different. We probably sync up pretty well. So, really in my perspective, but I think this is consistent with a lot of consultants, really. I think consultants want to support DOTs to deliver their projects and their programs and help them fulfill their mission. I really think that they are looking for opportunities to apply their expertise and their specialized skills for that DOT and to really help DOT figure out that challenge or whatever that problem is that they have. Also they want to have opportunities to share perspective and ideas on things such as innovation or technology or strategy, even on possible challenges and solutions that they've encountered. And there's also an opportunity to show a different way of doing things. I've found in my career that DOTs, if you're working with the right kind of people, they're always open to that. And I think consultants are also interested in sharing their their experiences that they've developed from working with other DOTs or municipalities, or even working with other consultants, on these teaming arrangements as a prime or a sub, and sharing the challenges that they've seen through these experiences with DOTs to help them, navigate that head off before they actually encounter it. And then there's also, the recommendations from real life solutions on what they've worked on and what's worked well and what hasn't worked well. And from my time at DOT and in the consultant sector, my time at DOT really exposed me as a consultant. And I always say this tongue in cheek now, but when I was a consultant before, I kind of felt like I understood about 65, 70% of how a DOT functioned. But what I learned from being a DOT employee is I probably only truly understood about 40%, and that might be giving myself more percentage than real. But DOTs are faced with an enormous amount of challenges every single day. The breadth and depth of the program, these agencies are very complex, and I truly feel consultants really seek opportunities to better understand DOTs and their challenges, and to find ways to help them in navigating those issues and delivering these projects or programs, or helping update their guidance materials, or developing training, or even being embedded at the DOT. That's one value that you can't really put a dollar value on, is having consultants embedded in the DOT, because then they truly understand both sides of it much, much better. I also think consultants are seeking opportunities to provide their staff additional exposure and experiences so they can better serve the DOT they're working for, or even their future clients. From my time as a consultant and a DOT, I think consultants truly want partnerships, meaningful partnerships with DOTs. They want DOTs to trust them and lean upon them as an extension of the team. And I think they want to know, excuse me, what work DOTs have coming out in the future. And we'll get into this in a little bit more here in a bit, but they want to know what's coming out in the future so they can strategize on the approach and the best teaming arrangements to meet the DOT's needs. And they want to know how they can better help DOT. Oftentimes when I met with consultants as a DOT employee, that was a question that many of them posed. But at the end of the day, I think they want to support DOT staff that often have a much larger purview and responsibility, and a focus on more than just one project.
Hey, Chris, you bring up some great points about what motivates consultants to work with agencies. And of course, you and I have interesting perspectives, having worked, both of us, at different agencies and now at consultants. What I would add to some of the reasons that consultants really want to work with agencies is that we want to add value to the work being done by the agency. We want to discover what's important to them, what's important to the public and the stakeholders, what's needed. And we like the challenges of putting together the right combination of people and tools and ideas to develop those solutions for the owner and with the owner. And we live and work in the same communities. We're interested in and invested in making good decisions that bring good results to the traveling public. And so all of those things that motivate agency staff also motivate us. Like you were saying, it's not all that different. But at the end of the day, we that work in the consulting world, we are in companies, we're in business to make a profit. And that leads us to our next discussion topic about how consultants really work. And so to think about how consultant companies really work, we'll break this into a few different parts. And I'll start out by talking about some different business models that you'll find across the consulting world. And there are a number of different types of models. For example, there are local firms with just a few people that do work with agencies, or there are regional firms that might have multiple offices and perhaps offer more than one type of service. There's national firms that do work in multiple geographies, provide a broader range of services, might cover multiple market sectors, bring expertise and the ability to leverage staff and resources across different regions of the country. And then there are global firms that do business all across the world, have offices in multiple countries, perhaps even headquarters outside of the US. So all of these are different types of firms and where they're located. Some are specialized and provide very unique type of services, be it geotechnical, structural, legal, financial, very targeted type services, or some are even focused on specific market sectors. For example, only roadways or only structures or only airports, water and wastewater or transit. And then we look at the business organization of companies. Some are publicly owned, meaning they have public stakeholders. They're on the stock exchange. Members of the general public can own and trade stock in those companies. Well, some consultants are employee owned. So the people you would work with to deliver the projects, they also happen to be employee owners of the companies. And that's just a different makeup. And then there are even more differences, such as limited partnerships, sole proprietors, et cetera. You get the point. There are a number of different shapes, flavors, and sizes of consulting companies. They're not all the same. And but they are all in business. And so let's look at some of the other common business issues that you'll see. So one of those is overhead. This is something that is present on all the contracts. Some of you that work at agencies might sometimes wonder, what is that? Well, why do we have to worry about that? Why do we have to pay for that in consultant contracts? So to start and to provide some context, consultants typically maintain a cost accounting system for recording costs that are incurred in delivering work. Each project has a project number, just like at agencies. And so what we really need to talk about is direct costs and indirect costs. The idea here is that direct costs are those that are specifically incurred for a project or a contract, versus indirect costs, which are those things that are not specifically tied to one particular contract. And it's these indirect costs that get factored into identifying and determining what is the company's overhead rate. But this isn't just a random list of things. What items can and cannot be included in the list of indirect costs and that overhead rate is spelled out in the Federal Acquisition Regulations, or FAR, the cost principles. And while companies develop the overhead rates each year, it's also audited by an independent audit firm. And then as another step, what you'll often find is that a public agency would audit a particular consultant's indirect cost structure and do a cognizant audit of that. And then that, in a sense, would provide certification for other agencies to rely upon in establishing the overhead rates for other contracts as well. So typically, it's that very formal process guided by federal regs that determines what those overhead rates are, what can and cannot be included, and that sets the stage then to be consistent from year to year. Chris?
Yeah, Paul did a great job of kind of walking through some very, what I would consider complex topics there. And I'm an engineer, not an accountant, but that kind of brings us to the question of how consultants are structured to be able to accommodate these types of expenses. Oftentimes they have accounting staff, they have billing staff, they have software set up very similarly to what most DOTs have in their finance folks. They have complicated systems that are there to help track the charges, the direct expenses to specific contracts or specific projects. Those direct costs, like project management, engineering, project controls, and and really project-specific invoicing and budget management are all based upon these applications. And it could be done by one application, or smaller firms that may use multiple applications to accommodate the same end result. Since these are identified as direct costs, they can't be put into overhead or classified as indirect costs. And we have to be careful treating direct costs as indirect costs, or even vice versa, whether on a specific contract or a type of work. It really runs against the federal cost accounting standards. And as Paul said, items and overhead, they're not random. It's done according to the federal regs and that independent audit. And really, it also verifies from one company to another. It varies from one company to another how they do business, how they are structured, and how they apply the federal regulations to their business organizational structure and practices.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. And probably enough on overhead. Let's go to another topic that is present in the business world, and that is the item of profit. And so questions that come up around that is, what is it? How is it different than overhead? And why should an agency have to deal with that and pay for that? Well, for starters, and perhaps to say the obvious, consultant companies aren't nonprofit organizations. So yes, there is a need and an interest to be able to not only pay the bills, but also make a reasonable profit in doing so. And so what is that? What's behind that? Well, first, when consultants bring on employees and have employees working, they're not just paying their employees to a salary to do the work, but they're also, just like agencies, trying to attract and retain good employees and keep their employees happy and excited to work on the kinds of projects that consultant companies pursue. And part of that is looking at benefit packages, just like agencies do with their employees, be it retirement, health care, vacation, life insurance, but also things like computers, software, training, going to conferences to stay up to speed on the latest best practices in the industry and the state of the practice. Very similar to what agencies do for their people. In terms of profit, it's typically negotiated for each contract based on a number of different factors that vary from one type of work to another. So factors that can influence what that reasonable rate of profit might be for a particular contract include things such as the type and the value of services that are being contemplated in that consultant contract, meaning how specialized is the work, or unique or complex is the expertise needed for that particular scope. What level of subcontracting is needed? Is it extensive, or is it a few firms? That can play a factor in that profit discussion. How sensitive is the project due to politics or longevity or potential reasons that the work would be shortened or influenced in the future, and a long list of other potential risks that are present during the scope of that work. All of those are different factors that should be discussed between the agency and the consultant partner to determine what is that reasonable profit for that scope of work. Chris?
Thanks, Paul. And given that the consultants, they are business, obviously there's the technical folks and there's the leadership folks, but there's also the folks that are watching the numbers. And by the numbers, what I mean is, how much work do they currently have? How much staff do they have? Do they have enough work to keep their staff busy? Meaning, are they able to work on projects and bill their time to a specific client on a specific project? If in a consultant world, if you're not working on projects and you're not able to bill your time to a client, you're not getting any revenue coming in for you to be able to pay for that employee's time and also the associated overhead costs. So if you're not billable, and there's different words for it, sold time, billability, If you're not billable, you're most likely are charging time to an administrative number, or maybe they have to take leave without pay. And if they're charging to an administrative number, and then the compensation for this unbillable time to the employee is essentially eroding any of the profits that the company may have accrued on the projects that they are working on. They're always looking ahead. They're always looking at their projected workload. Do they have too much? Are they overwhelmed and not being able to deliver their projects? Do they have too little? Need to maybe look into another office and see if they can get some help to get these unbillable employees billable. But they're also looking for growth and knowing what's coming down the pike and what services their customers might need. But they're also looking out for key opportunities where their staff can support and assist DOTs. One thing that, as you can probably understand, is they're also looking for normalcy and stability in their clients. Obviously, they'd like to not have peaks and valleys of work coming from their clients to their staff. Or when employees are super busy versus times when their employees are being underutilized. That causes a lot of challenges on the consultant management team to try to figure out how are we going to get this work done, or hey, we have so and so that doesn't have any work. What can we do to get them to be billable? Because ultimately that is eroding their overall profit. And so this may assist you in understanding why firms are always so interested in meeting with the DOTs, trying to make sure that you remember them as a DOT, make sure the DOT remembers.
Chris, are you there?
Chris may have gotten hung up in the with the gremlins there and the technology. So I'll jump in. Oh, there's Chris. Great. You got
Sorry,
cut off there a little bit.
not for sure what happened. But really, they're always looking for those advanced opportunities. They're not just looking for next month. They're looking 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year out, trying to see what's coming up so they can be.
Well, I'll pick up on the line that Chris was starting there, and that is looking ahead and how do consultants choose what next pursuits to go after. And that's a really fun part of this theme of looking under the hood of how consultants work. And I can say that this really does vary a lot, just as the type of consulting companies varies, so does their approach to pursuing new work. Some focus on very specifically on certain clients or types of projects. Some choose to work with contractors on alternative delivery projects like design build. Some consultants only pursue small work. Some pursue very big projects. And Chris touched on this a moment ago, but for those of you at agencies, it may feel distracting to hear from consultants with questions such as, hey, when is that next project coming out? That may be distracting and you wonder, why do they keep asking me that? It's usually a genuine effort to really understand what's coming up in the future, to be prepared and to start planning and to have the right people in the works to be ready for those future pursuits. Consultants are competitive, and ultimately we as consultants want to go after the projects that we think we can win and be successful as a business and to successfully deliver for the client. So how do we prepare for these things? Well, I can tell you that it's a very extensive process generally, although this varies also from one company to another. Typically, the work of preparing and identifying those future pursuits that you all are thinking about, that work starts well ahead of any RFP and is extensive, many months, sometimes years ahead of the actual RFP release. And so naturally, it takes a lot of time, energy, and is expensive. And part of the preparation is looking at things such as the right project manager. This is very often a key role that's evaluated separate from all the other team members. Who is that PM? What is their experience? Why are they the best possible PM for this particular project? So a lot of thought goes into finding that right PM. Do they have the right experience? What are their relationships with the client organization, et cetera? What's their availability? Who do we have and when can they be available to fully commit to being on the pursuit, which can be a long process, but also then delivering the actual work? And what special expertise and project history might they bring to be that best possible person? Other factors come into play, such as the key task leaders, separate from the PM, as I mentioned, but just as important, who are they? What is their background? And are they the right people with the right type of mindset and approaches and relationships to be placed into a pursuit coming up? And then we look at other team members. Perhaps consultants would need to look at a joint venture, or a prime would need to look at bringing on a number of subs. At the end of the day, no one firm can really do it all. And if they could, should they? So teaming is a big factor and a big consideration because it leverages the strengths of multiple firms and it helps small firms learn and grow, which is really good overall for the industry. So a number of factors go into play as far as what projects consultants look to pursue and how they go about pursuing it.
You know, I'm going to leave my camera off just because I think all the kids are home from school and they've hopped on their online gaming consoles. One thing that I wanted to piggyback off what Paul was saying, just as a reminder that all of the work that these firms go after for RFPs, preparing these presentations, developing these teaming arrangements, that is all really work that is performed on the firm's overhead. It's a part of their business development. And I just want to share that, the consultants, they really run these proposals or these pursuits very similar to how they would run a project for a client. They have a project manager, they have a diverse team, they have a graphics person, they have a technical editor. They may have a technical editor. They have leadership that reviews the overall strategy and the teaming arrangement and the agreements amongst the team. And so all of that is really run just like a project, but it just happens to be not billable. It's an overhead, it's a pursuit, and it also has a risk of, if they get selected, then that's great. But if they don't, then they did all that work and didn't really get anything out of it other than potentially using that team or that proposal to pursue another future advertisement. In a perfect world, I think another thing to consider here is that risk. And in a perfect world, consultants would, in my opinion, would love a few things, which really isn't that different from most companies that provide service to a client. Looking for normalcy, stability, predictability, and diversity of opportunity. And the diversity kind of leads me into my next point, which is, as a consultant, it's kind of like your 401k. You don't want to put all of your eggs in one basket. And that can, and there are some firms that just have that one client that they work for and they do a great job. But there's also another perspective that might be risky. You might not put all of your your retirement into one type of investment strategy. And so a lot of firms, they're interested in doing work for municipalities or planning organizations or other DOTs. They may even serve as a subconsultant or work with design builders. And oftentimes they're expanding their discipline services to serve their current clients better and to also allow them to serve more types of clients. Some consultants only work for municipalities. Some consultants only work for DOTs. Some consultants do a lot of federal work. And then there's the whole package of all the firms that can do all types of services. And as Paul was talking about a little bit earlier, there's a focus, maybe on a specific discipline. And so, if they have one client and that client has a revenue issue, and this is a real potential because it's happened with COVID just recently, that, when COVID started, there were several DOTs that had to suspend portions of their programs basically because people were driving less and they leaned heavily on the gas tax, the state gas tax. And when people weren't driving, then that impacted their revenue stream and they had to make changes to their program to be able to remain solvent and in a positive cash balance. Paul talked about proposals and strategy and teaming and the right people and the right project manager. But you do win some and you do lose some. But they still did all the work of developing the team, the strategy, the proposal at their own cost. While these proposals, they function very similar to a project work like I was talking about. And that's really what we want to share with you from our perspective about the risk side of it. One thing that we really wanted to, Paul and I really wanted to make sure that all of the DOT folks, understood is it isn't all about the money. Consultants are real people. We have good relationships with DOT. Where consultants are looking for challenging opportunities, projects, and assignments, and they want to be valued, and they want to offer value, and they want to help fulfill the DOT's missions. They want to be able to utilize their subject matter experts. They want to be able to share with you the innovation that maybe their firm has developed to support their clients. There's a strong interest in sharing ideas and knowledge from working with other DOTs or other clients on the challenging projects that they have that a consultant was able to help navigate through. And at the end of the day, they need honest and constructive feedback so they can provide better service to their clients. And most importantly, consultants really value their relationships and their partnerships with DOTs, and they really take pride in helping DOTs solve their challenges. So let's pivot here and hear more from our other panelists. Let's pull them in and let's discuss some best practices to ensure mutual success when DOTs and consultants are working together. Jeff, would you like to start us off?
Sure. We're going to talk about keys to success and project management factors in successful project delivery. Success for the DOT should involve a desire for there to be mutual success for the consultant. We need the consultants to be successful for the future of our programs, and it's important that DOTs acknowledge the need for a thriving consultant engineering market. As Peter mentioned in one of our prep meetings, we share mutually in successes with our consultant partners, but we also suffer together in our failures too. Success depends on a number of project management factors that we're going to cover, and that must be agreed upon and documented. Sometimes we think we don't have time for the documentation, but it's the documentation that provides the path to partnership and success. It's important for accountability, but also for the most successful projects, it's the documentation and reporting that provides progress, transparency, and reveals the challenges that the project team needs to address to meet the goals. when we see the challenges ahead in the distance, then we have more options to address them. Peter?
Thank you, Jeff. So another, probably, if not the biggest factor, is obviously the quality of the scope. If there is a heartbeat of a project, if there is a heartbeat of an RFP, it is the scope. And some key elements to consider in developing a scope are making sure that all the expectations are clear from your consultant team or even contractor team, if that may be the case, depending on the contracting method. What are your assumptions? What is included or excluded? It's good to define the full scope of services right at the outset and explain in clear detail whether or not the project is anticipated to be single phase or multi-phase. Some things to think about that are good practice in terms of preparing a scope is to think about what is the objective, and that should be stated very, very clearly right up front. And that may be just a single sentence, but in your scope of work, you really should explain what the point is. The point is to repair a bridge. The point is to replace a bridge. The point is to resurface a road or reconstruct a road, whatever the case may be. And obviously that should be followed by a very detailed narrative on what the scope of the project is. So you get into detail. Say it's a road project, you'd want to talk about the length of the road, whether or not it would involve milling, an overlay. Are you proposing to replace existing curbing, or leave what's there? Are you repairing catch basins, replacing catch basins? Is there additional work beyond that basic objective, such as replacing guardrail or installing new guardrail, fixing sidewalks, adding ADA ramps, or repairing or replacing existing ADA ramps? Are there bicycle components to the project? Are there mass transit components associated with perhaps buses and things of that nature? Think about what might be required in terms of detours. That's very, very important. If we know there's detours and you anticipate that they're going to be needed or night work is going to be needed, that should be stated very clearly right up front in the scope. Do any type of field reviews need to be completed up front? Are there any inspection work? For example, perhaps you expect the consultant to do inspection on catch basins. And if that's the case, you should state that and indicate how many there are. Provide as much information as you can. Is there work that's going to be completed by other projects? In Rhode Island, a lot of times we'll nest projects together. We do all of our tree trimming, permanent striping. We have contracts that handle that. So those are typically not included in the construction contract, but may be part of the design contract. That all needs to be spelled out. It's very, very important to get that clarity. Survey is a big part of it. Explain specifically what is needed in terms of survey and the quality of that survey. Is it a class 1 survey or other? Do you expect that you would need grade plans for some tricky drainage areas or perhaps some wheelchair ramps, things of that nature? High-level requirements. You should talk about what those high-level requirements, goals, and metrics are specific to, for example, your schedule or perhaps maintaining traffic and minimizing disruption during construction. You should talk about the project delivery method, design, build, design, bid, build. Most of us are probably most familiar with design, bid, build, and that is by far the most common mechanism, but explain all that. Talk about risks. What are the risks? What are the constraints? Are there stormwater improvements in a job? Is there railroad work or a railroad in the vicinity that could impact the project? Underground utility relocations and things of that nature. Think about NEPA. You're going to know what the class of action on NEPA is right up front if it's a federally funded project, or some states have their own form of NEPA. Explain all that up front and get that right into the scope so that it's very clear. Regulatory approvals. Think about permitting, stormwater discharges, water quality certifications. In some areas, there may be coastal approvals that are necessary, or freshwater wetlands, water quality certifications, and things of that nature. Following on that, in terms of regulatory process, you also want to think about hazmat. What do you know? What don't you know? State all that. What's the expectation? Do you expect that you'll have land use restrictions that'll come out of a contract? Things of that nature. The historical processes, section 106 and 4F, all that should be addressed to the extent that you're able to do it. Is there a stakeholder interface? And if so, it's good to define that. What is it? Who are the stakeholders? And what is the expectation? There'll be a series of mailers, emails, perhaps preparing something for the web page, or it may be something akin to a public hearing or public meeting. Right of way is also oftentimes a very big issue. And I think it's very important to explain specifically what is anticipated in that regard. You can span everything from easements, use agreements, there may be acquisitions, takings by eminent domain, functional replacements, and things of that nature. So get all that in there. That's very, very important. Utilities, very big. Underground utilities are hugely important. So it's very, very important to get all that up front in terms of that into the scope. Any additional information you have, graphics, record plans, things of that nature, utility location information, and all very, very important. Try and get that into the scope and pin that down. Construction phase services, if it's an issue, or if that's desired, that should be included and noted. Definitely talk about any of the assumptions that were made in preparing a scope. What's probably obvious, but very, very important, is to have a graphic explain where the project is. Make sure that's noted. Doesn't have to be detailed, but it's definitely very important. And then the last thing I want to talk about really is adjacent projects. Sometimes, consultants or anybody for that matter knows what they know. They don't know what they don't know. But as the DOT, you're going to have an understanding of what the adjacent projects are. And some attention should be given to that in the scope of work because it's pertinent and it's very, very relevant to providing all the information. So, in closing, what I'd like to say is I think probably the best thing to do is to try and get as much detail as you can. Say what you know in detail, say what you don't know. To the extent that you can, try and provide something that's really turnkey so that there's no interpretation or loss of interpretation later on.
Thanks,
Chris?
Peter. I think you did a great job of covering scope. I think schedule, and we are on the TCPM webinar, schedule is another factor that I think we need to make sure everybody's aware. What are expectations, for delivery? I know that there's various applications out there to develop schedules. Some are more complex than others. I would just hope that the DOT and the consultant that's working with the DOT have an agreement on what applications they're going to use, how we're tracking the major activities and tasks, making sure we have knowledgeable people that know how to use this software, because developing a good schedule with connections of predecessors and successors, that is really the foundational element of developing a schedule. And really, in my opinion, having a good schedule is a plan for the whole team, the consultants and the DOT, on how we're going to get from point A to point B. I'll pass it off to Paul to talk about budget.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Budget being the next big component that we as project managers think about. And in this theme of best practices or tools that can be used to help manage the budget, one of those key best practices is the idea of earned value management. And I know some agencies already do this, some choose not to, but with earned value management, in essence, it's somewhat similar to having a cost-loaded construction schedule, meaning at the very beginning, before work is being done, as it's being scoped and budgeted, there's a plan set in place so that each activity and deliverable is tagged with the actual effort that is anticipated to occur along the way, so that you have planned value for each major activity, each major deliverable. And then as the work is progressing, that progress is being reported. The earned value is estimated. Think of that as each month or so, the consultant would estimate the percent of work complete on each item. And then there's the actual value, the actual number of hours and labor efforts charged towards those activities and deliverables. And you compare the two. There's a qualitative comparison and an objective comparison to routinely and regularly look at how is the work progressing? Is it progressing on the schedule that was anticipated? or not? And how is it progressing in terms of the budget? And so all of those things that Peter talked about earlier with the clear scoping and information that's gathered and that translating to a very detailed and clear scope plays into this budget component as well, where you have a clear plan in place. It's being tracked regularly, and the variances to that budget plan are being openly discussed. What's causing that? Why are things running under or over? And why is the schedule running long or short? All of those variances have reasons, and it's much better to address those openly and together regularly rather than if and when a big issue arises. So earned value management is another tool to consider in managing budget. Jeff?
Last major project management factor that we have noted is quality. Quality is so important because the quality of the free construction engineering services is leveraged so high in construction. And so the value of having quality work is very, very important. So what process will a consultant use for QC/QA? Will the process vary by deliverable? We'll manage the process. And how will the consultant bill for quality reviews? How are quality reviews factored into the deliverable schedule? It's important for DOTs to support the resource required and the time required for QC/QA.
Thanks, Jeff. And that kind of pulls us down to how do we kind of manage these project management factors as a whole, and what happens when things don't go as we expected or as we had planned. You know, in my opinion, communication is probably the number one challenge and the number one opportunity. And establishing a routine cadence for sure is going to allow things to not linger or be an issue for very long if we have regular meetings. But we also need to have open and honest conversation and open and honest relationships about how we're doing both directions to make sure we're all operating as one team. So establishing those regular check-ins to evaluate progress, work completed, work coming up, challenges, and potential opportunities. I think a pretty good progress report that goes along with the invoice with the appropriate level of detail as outlined by what the Department of Transportation that you're working for needs is critical. What work was done? What are there any scope, schedule, budget issues? Are there any new risks that go along with that reporting period? And what's being addressed? What's being accomplished to address those issues? And really, I like both parties taking a no surprises approach. We're all trying to achieve the success for the project. We are one team. And so taking the no surprises approach is the best method in my opinion. Issues will arise. There's no doubt, we've all had them before. And changes aren't bad, but we do need to proactively identify them and address them.
When issues do arise, there also has to be fairness by the DOTs in recognizing that changes in scope and expectations may result in more work for the consultant than planned, and that additional compensation may be required. We have to be open to information about the effort that's required that we may not be fully aware of. And as partners with our consultants, we need to be responsive to addressing their change requests.
And I think another thing that I would add, Jeff, is training to ensure that staff and consultants know how your DOT wants it done. Now, we're not talking about how to do roadway design 101. We're talking about how does your DOT want it done so all projects, all products look like it came from one DOT. Making sure everybody is set up for success and knowing what success looks like. The other thing that I would add is consultants are always asking how they can help a DOT, and this is a challenge. In my past life, I always urge consultants to bring ideas on how you think you can help DOT, whether that's ideas, new technology, strategy, what you've learned from another client. And so that really kind of concludes our webinar for today on the topics that we wanted to cover. Want to thank the panel for their insight and perspectives on these topics. I know this is a lot of information to squeeze in a 1-hour webinar, and I'm hopeful that our attendees generate some great questions. We do realize that we are at time, and as project managers, we do want to finish on time, but we have agreed to stick around an additional 10 minutes to listen to, look at the questions that have been dropped in the box. And we'll be sticking around another 10 minutes. If you all have a desire to stick around, that would be great. So looking at the first question, as a consultant, what are your concerns about various payment mechanisms? It seems that lump sum arrangements incentivize minimizing hours to maximize profit, and hourly arrangements incentivize maximizing contract chargeable costs to minimize company overhead costs. Anybody from the panel want to jump on that?
Well, Chris, I'll get us started. It's an interesting question. It's a good question too. Some first thoughts that come to my mind is the payment mechanism, whether it's lump sum as suggested in the question, or cost plus fixed fee, specified rates, or any of the others. That mechanism really needs to be matched to the type of work being done and the clarity of the scope. Can it be tightly scoped without a lot of uncertainties, or is it something else, or is it more staff time to be done over a period of time in a support role? Whatever it is, just needs to be matched up then with that mechanism. The other thing I would say is it's like choosing the right delivery method for a project, in that there is no one approach that's perfect in all situations. And so it needs to be thought through carefully by both parties in open, honest communication as to, for this scope and the expectations and deliverables and timeline and all the factors that come into play, what's the right reasonable way to structure this cost mechanism for this work, and talk through it and set a budget and a clear scope and plan to have that regular, open, honest communication. So those are some initial thoughts to get us started.
Yeah, Paul, I kind of have my perspective, just like you said, it's just like alternative delivery, design, bid, build. There's a time and a place for it. And so you really need to think about what you're doing. What's your assignment? Do you know exactly what you're going to do? Do you know how many alternatives you're going to look at? Do you know what type of analysis? You know what the end product looks like? When things are known, that really lends itself to a lump sum type of purchase order or contract or whatnot. When you don't know how many meetings or how many alternatives or how many iterations you're going to do, that really leans itself to really a cost plus aspect, in my opinion. So let's go to the next question. From the perspective of a consultant, what are the best practices DOTs can employ to manage scope creep? Scope of, and that could be scope of consultants' work versus the scope of the project.
Well, I'll take the first part there, Chris. From the perspective of the consultant's work, I think to begin, and Peter touched on this earlier, is really to have clear upfront scoping. That is an important process. It can be lengthy and at times uncomfortable, but it's so important. And another thing Peter mentioned was documenting assumptions. You have clear scope, and then you have all the assumptions that are built into that scope. I know some agencies do allow the inclusion of assumptions in scope documents and contracts. Some agencies do not. Whether it's allowed or not, you should keep track of those, just because in a month, a year, or two or more later, it's a reference point to understand what was behind this scope, this one line in a scope, what was really behind that, just to bring clarity to the situation. Another key part of that, I think, is documenting decisions that get made along the way. Again, time rolls on, people are busy. Document key decisions that are made going forward, so that so that you have that record and it's clear then to all parties. Frequent check-ins on scope, schedule, budget, all the things we've been talking about here. And as you said, no surprises, especially with regard to scope. If something comes up, good or bad, that isn't in the contract or in the scope, talk about it. Don't wait to inform the other party. No one likes surprises. The goal should be no surprises on any team member. And so don't be afraid to ask questions or say, hey, this is something we didn't anticipate, or we decided this was, whatever it is, have that conversation early.
Paul, my one side of my brain is consultant, one side of my brain is DOT. The second part of this question makes me think about the DOT side of it, the scope of the actual project. You get out there and, your field staff are tromping around looking at things, and, 1,000 feet down the road, they find this culvert that is getting washed out and the fill slope starting to erode. That's a shoot a flare up to DOT and tell them, hey, I know this is out of scope, but 1,000 feet down the road, we've got a potential issue here. And and then from a DOT perspective, you're like, man, we're going to be doing all this work out there. We really need to extend this project another 1,000 feet, but that may be widening of shoulders and extension of sidewalks and purchasing more right of way and relocating more utilities. And that really comes down to a leadership decision on, do we want to go ahead and extend this project to fix this issue? And if so, we're going to increase the budget here. So what are we going to do to delay another project? Or maybe we go back and apply some value engineering to pull this cost back so we can do that extension. So great question. Two completely different takes on that question there. So what I'm going to do, just for the sake of time, to close this out, and I appreciate the 300 people that have stuck with us, we are going to take the questions in the chat box and we will develop some responses, and we'll have that information up on the website. So you can see at a later time. What I'd like to thank the panel, and I did see, we did have a little bit of a pre-construction spin on this webinar. As you can see, it was a lot of material, but we do want to be thinking about project management from a construction perspective. So we apologize for our poll not capturing our construction partners and trying to see how many of those folks were there. So we do apologize. So I'd like to thank the panel for all of your preparation, sharing us your perspective, providing us your insight. I think perspective is a valuable thing, and the more we all can gain perspective, the better we'll understand each other and be able to work with one another. So for our webinar attendees, I hope you saw value in today's webinar and obtained some additional perspectives. I would like to welcome you to the next TCPM's webinar, which is scheduled for April 27th at the same time. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Trish.
Okay. Thank you all for attending today.